morning. I think my results are out. Hi everyone, my name is Janati and welcome back to my YouTube channel. So for today's video, I'm going to be talking about my experience with the NPTE, which is the board exam for physical therapy. I'll be talking about my timeline for studying, how I studied, the resources I used, how much it cost me to actually take the NPTE, and my experience on test day. Okay, so let's get going. So firstly, how long before the NPTE did I start studying? I took the NPTE in January of 2026, and I started studying about 6 months prior to that, only because my school, which is Rosalind Franklin University, I graduated in November, and in order for you to like graduate and like pass the program, you had to do like a comprehensive exam similar to the board exam. So in order to study for that, our school bought us the Final Frontier package, which I'll talk about later. So that's why I started studying a little prior to, like a lot prior to the NPTE. But I know there are people who study for 3 months and do just fine. Because like there were some of my classmates that took the board early, which was in October, I believe, and all of those people passed. So if you're watching this and you're like, oh my God, I'm studying only for 3 months, don't worry, you'll be just fine. This is just the timeline that I had. Okay, so in terms of how my studies, like study day looked like prior to the NPTE, like prior to actually finishing the school comprehensive exam, it was very different. But when I actually started studying for the NPTE, which was, I would say, like hardcore studying, which is 3 months prior to the NPTE, most of my day was spent studying. I would spend 4 hours on Monday, Tuesdays, and Thursdays, and 3 hours on Wednesdays and Fridays, and on the weekends, maybe like an hour or two for review. But I knew I had to take the weekend mostly off, because if you know me, I cannot like be like go and not give my mind a break, because otherwise I would burn out, and I knew myself too. So that was kind of like the study timetable I followed, and honestly it worked out great for me because I was good at balancing both like my personal life as well as my like study life, if that makes sense. And secondly, in terms of the resources that I used to study, so the first and main resource was Final Frontier, which our school purchased for us. So I didn't really pay anything for it, but I would say it's a great resource in order to like kind of like compress everything into like what you need to know, because there's so much you need to know for the NPTE. But Final Frontier does a great job in like organizing content, and they do a really good job also in giving you ways to really remember the content. Because I don't know if it was my program, but I feel like sometimes they like didn't talk about the basics as much as they needed to, because maybe they thought that we already knew about it. But Final Frontier really starts from the basics, and it really helps you get a good understanding of the whole content aspect, not just like the important aspects of it. And the second resource I used is this Therapy Ed textbook, which again I didn't buy for myself. Brendan bought it for me, but I think this was somewhere around $150 or $200. And yes, you don't really need a textbook, but with Final Frontier, I would say they didn't really touch on certain topics or aspects that are not necessarily important but do show up in the NPTE, and they're important to know because it's easier for you to figure out the right answer because you know something, versus if there are like three options that you have no idea what it is and you still don't know what the right answer is. It's harder to pick the right answer because at this point you're not even making like an educated guess, if that makes sense. So I actually read almost the whole textbook. The only part I think I didn't get through was neuro, but I think it was like super helpful for me to go through it because it really gave me a different way to look at things, if that makes sense. And in terms of free resources that I used 2 mobile apps. So let me look at it. Oh my god, I think I might have deleted the apps already. Yeah, I think I might have deleted them already. Yeah. Anyway, so I used one of the apps was Final Frontier, which was pretty good, but I would say the software itself was very like buggy and it wouldn't work sometimes. So if that happens to you, know that it's pretty common. And the second app I used, I don't remember the name of it, but again, it was similar to Final Frontier, where you would get 1 question a day and just you'll know if you answered right or wrong, and then you can review your rationale later. Okay, in terms of some other free resources, I used the Final Frontier podcast, which I got on Spotify. Again, super helpful. And another one I used was the PT Hustle podcast, again on Spotify, but I'm sure it's on like other platforms if you want to listen to. And I think the PT Hustle podcast really helped me in understanding ways to approach a question, especially when you have no idea what the question is asking. Kyle Rice does a really good job in giving you a way to rationalize yourself through the question. And I would definitely recommend that podcast, especially if you're like in your clinicals and studying for the board exam, just to listen to it in the car or on the go somewhere, because it's super, super helpful. And he also has a lot of free resources like linked under his podcast, like in the description. And I think those were super helpful too. The next aspect of studying for the NPTE is actually how do you go about studying for the NPTE, right? And I remember like looking at YouTube videos, trying to figure out what people were doing. And I think the biggest advice I would give someone that I got was do not change do not change your study method from grad school or like through PT school, because clearly that worked for you to get to this point. So don't try something new, just stick to it and hopefully it'll get you through the NPTE, right? Because if it helped you get through PT school, it'll definitely help you get through the NPTE. And so just remember that. But just to give you an idea of what I did was, again, I used the Final Frontier lectures and then I made my own notes. I've also made a previous video of how I study for my exam, so you can go take a look at that. But I pretty much use the same approach, but I also use my practice exams is really a good understanding of where I am with all the different content sections. You can also purchase the PEAT for $99 online. And this is really good resource because it replicates the NPTE. And I would definitely recommend taking the PEAT exam at least once before you take the actual NPTE, and try to take it as if it were the real exam, so you know kind of what works good for you. Because what I understood was I needed to take a break between each like section, otherwise I was getting burnt out during the exam, right? So I wouldn't have known that if I hadn't taken the PEAT as if I was taking the real exam. So just things like that is like really helpful to find out about yourself when you take these practice exams. And what was I even talking about? So like I was saying, in terms of study method, so I watched the Final Frontier lectures, took my own notes, took the practice exams and took the results of the practice exams and feedback from it to actually focus on what I needed to learn. And I would focus on like going through the content, but that was more initially. In the later stages, I would either like teach it back to me, teach it back to someone else, or try to like do active recall in terms of like just writing down everything I can remember on my iPad. And I also did a lot of practice questions through Final Frontier, but also I used AI a lot. I asked ChatGPT and Claude about like how I asked ChatGPT and Claude to give me like practice questions, and I would answer these practice questions. For the test day experience, I would say definitely drive to your test center if you can the day before, just so you know where you're going and you're not super anxious or like confused the day of the exam. That's what I did, and it was super helpful. And on the test day itself, make sure you're not wearing any like thing with the pocket or stuff like that, because so what you have to do is like go in, give your paperwork, and then they actually like run a metal scanner throughout and have you flip over your pocket. So they have you like pull up your jackets, lift your pants up. So it's just easier if you have less things to like have them check, because they check you every time you go in and out during your breaks. And in terms of like what you can take inside, you can only take a clear water bottle with you, and they'll give you the scratch paper. So usually for the PTE exam you get like a whiteboard, and the whiteboard you get, you can't even erase things, at least the one I had. So they only gave me 2 like whiteboard papers, and then once you're done you switch out, so you can only have 2 at a time. And they also had like noise canceling headphones, and like one with white noise, and I just used some white noise canceling ones, and those were super helpful. You get 5 hours for the NPTE if you don't have accommodations, and I think it was more than enough, especially because I took at least 5 minutes break between each section, and I still had enough time. I think I finished the exam in about 4 hours 45 minutes. I really took my sweet time because I was like, I'm in no rush. Like, I'd rather have like a good headspace during the exam and take my own sweet time than rush through it, because I felt like in my previous practice exams that's what I did, and it was definitely detrimental to my grade. So yeah, that was my whole experience with the NPTE. And in terms of the cost, I would definitely say save a lot of money, because it'll take you at least $600 to $700, if not more, because it takes you $485 only to sign up for the actual exam. And depending on where you're taking your exam, you might have to pay like Prometric testing center fee. So I had to pay, I think, somewhere between $120 to $150 for the Prometric testing center fee. And then you have to get your fingerprint taken and like a background check done or something like that. And for that, depending on where you go, it might take like anywhere between $20 to $100. For me, it took me about $75, I believe, for me to get that done. So yeah, like all in all, I would say I spent around $700 just to take the exam. And so definitely save up money well before the NPTE, because there are going to be these expenses that show up. So yeah, that was everything that I had to say. And in terms of when you get your results, they'll send you an email saying, oh, your results will be available on X, Y, and Z day. For me, they said it'll be available on February 4th, I believe, or like a Wednesday, but they release the results on a Tuesday, and they don't send you an email. The only way you know is, you know, someone in your class checks the results, and like they either say it in the group chat or post it on social media, and you're like, oh my god, the results are out. So that's how I found out that the results were out. I was like going through Instagram and saw all my classmates posting pass, and I was like, oh my god, the results are out. So yeah, so just know that sometimes they don't even send an email saying the results are out, and they might be out early. So yeah, that's all I had for today's video. I would say definitely know that you need to study a lot for this exam, but if you put in the work and if you study the right way, knowing what your weaknesses are and actually working on them, you can pass and see the light at the end of the tunnel. You went through PT school, you definitely can get through the NPTE. So if you're taking the exam soon, good luck, you got this. If you have any questions or comments, leave them down below and I'll definitely try to answer them. Thank you all for watching my video, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye.